Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening for the Pink Agenda's TPA Talks on the Agenda, The Power of Positive Psychology. Please welcome TPA Board Member Samantha Shubes.
Good evening and welcome to TPA Talks on the Agenda, The Power of Positive Psychology. I'm Samantha Shubes and I'm proud to be a board member of the Pink Agenda. Raising awareness about tonight's topic is especially important to me and I'm thrilled to be here with you this evening. I first noticed a lump in my left breast as I was weaning my son Benjamin off breastfeeding. Thinking that it was related to breastfeeding, I gave it 2 weeks to go away on its own, but it only got worse, becoming painful to the touch. Without a family history of the disease, I never thought I could have breast cancer at 31 years old, let alone metastatic breast cancer. The way my first doctor broke the news was not hopeful or optimistic. She said I had this much time left and this is all she could do for me. My husband refused to accept that. Soon after, we found a new care team and oncologist who explained my results more clearly and told me that my outlook was far better because the cancer had only spread to my right hip bone. It can be difficult having to navigate everyone's emotions when talking to your child, significant other, and loved ones during this time. It is something I have experienced firsthand. Not knowing what was ahead and trying to keep strong while taking care of my son, my emotions would overwhelm me and I would sometimes have to sneak away to cry. I began seeing a social worker and regularly to help me through this process. Having someone not judging me, just listening and giving me the space to reflect on how I was feeling allowed me to see that my opinion was the most important. By the 5th week of my radiation, I was exhausted both physically and mentally. It took a lot to commit myself to a positive mindset without really knowing what the outcome of my treatment would be. But I believe my attitude helped me throughout my treatment, and I attribute that to the support that I have received. I can't emphasize enough how important patient mental well-being and support is in cancer treatment, which is why we are taking the time to talk tonight and go more in depth about this topic. I understand I will have to be in treatment for the rest of my life, but with progress in research and science, I am thrilled to share my latest scans in January showed no evidence of disease. I believe that knowledge is power, and I joined the Pink Agenda this year to contribute to its mission to raise awareness about breast cancer among my peers. We know that breast cancer journeys are unique, treatments are not the same, and friends and family who are diagnosed prefer different types of support. Researchers funded by TPA and our partner, the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, are investigating new ways to prevent, treat, and cure this disease from every angle. We created TPA Talks to showcase these perspectives, and with TPA Talks on the agenda, we're diving deeper into breast cancer topics that are especially relevant to our supporters. These events would not be possible without the leadership of the Pink Agenda's Education Committee or support of tonight's sponsors, Citrone 33 and Kendra Scott. We are always so grateful for Citrone 33's and Kendra Scott's commitment to breast cancer research and giving in a meaningful way. Thank you. Breast cancer continues to be the most commonly diagnosed cancer in the world, with nearly 287,000 new cases in the United States alone last year. More alarmingly, within our community, there was a 32% increase of metastatic breast cancer diagnoses in women aged 25 to 39 between the years of 2009 and 2015. The Pink Agenda approaches these major problems from 2 angles: through the research we fund and educational programming designed to reach this population. Tonight, we ask you to join us in moving this work forward. At any time, you can take out your cell phone and text the phrase TPA Talks, no spaces, to the number 44-321 to receive a secure link to donate. This phrase and phone number is also listed in the digital program booklet. We're so fortunate to have incredible panelists this evening, and I know they will inspire you to be a part of this game-changing progress. Thank you in advance. I am looking forward to their conversation, which will be moderated by Dr. Jordan Feingold. Dr. Feingold is a well-being researcher, positive psychology practitioner, and a resident physician in psychiatry at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Dr. Feingold's research and clinical interests involve protecting and promoting healthcare workers and patient well-being and incorporating positive psychology approaches into healthcare delivery. She is also the co-founder of Thrive RX, a comprehensive course that is proven to positively impact personal well-being, personal fulfillment, and financial literacy for physicians. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Jordan Feingold to kick off tonight's conversation.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for the introduction. And thank you for sharing a piece of your story with us. And congratulations on your most recent scans. Let's get started tonight. So, the goal of breast cancer prevention and treatment is to extend the lives of patients. But those life-saving treatments can also have devastating emotional effects. For young women, especially, facing trauma following treatment inducing side effects such as hair loss, sexual dysfunction, cognitive impairment, to concerns around fertility preservation and body image, this can cause a huge emotional strain. Managing the long-term side effects of treatment is so important to the quality of life in the years following these treatments. We also know that chronic stress increases breast cancer risk. And today, our speakers will help us to understand what science reveals about nurturing our well-being, not only for our mental health, but for our physical health, and to actually reduce breast cancer risk. So we are very fortunate to have a truly esteemed panel of experts with us tonight to discuss these important topics from every angle, bringing the perspectives of doctor, researcher, survivor, and advocate. I will start by introducing you to Dr. Julian Bauer. Dr. Bauer is a professor in the UCLA Department of Psychology and the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences, Associate Director of the Norman Cousins Center for Psychoneuroimmunology, and a member of the Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Bauer is nationally recognized as an expert on biobehavioral processes in breast cancer and their impact on health and well-being. She has conducted pioneering work on neuroimmune interactions in breast cancer survivors, focusing on immune mechanisms for behavioral symptoms such as cancer-related fatigue. Her research also examines the impact of psychosocial stress on behavioral and biological outcomes in cancer populations, and how mind-body interventions can be used to buffer stress and enhance happiness and well-being. Welcome, Dr. Bauer.
Thanks so much.
Next up, I will introduce Dr. Annette L. Stanton. Dr. Stanton is a distinguished professor and chair of the Department of Psychology and a distinguished professor of Department of in Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at UCLA. She is also a senior research scientist at the Norman Cousins Center for Psychoneuroimmunology, and she is a member of the Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Center. A licensed clinical psychologist and an author of more than 250 scientific publications, Dr. Stanton, through her research, identifies factors that promote or impede psychological and physical health in adults and couples undergoing profound and chronic stressors, with a focus on the experience of cancers of the breast, eye, pancreas, and lung. She translates her findings into action by developing and testing approaches to enhance well-being and health over the course of the cancer trajectory. Hi, Dr. Stanton.
Hello, my pleasure to be here.
And rounding out our incredible panel is Shayla Martin. By day, Shayla is senior sales executive at Grubhub here in New York City. Thank you for that. And a two-time marathon finisher and former collegiate sprinter. She has always been an athlete and committed to fitness. This also is part of why her breast cancer diagnosis in her 30s was all the more shocking. When Shayla began cancer treatment, in her own words, she discovered feelings that eventually led to her scheduling her first therapy appointment, coincidentally, a year to the day after her mastectomy. This began a journey of healing and recovery, which has allowed her to commit to a full life of joy, happiness, and fulfillment. Today, Shayla is a member of the Pink Agenda's Leadership Council, and last October, she marked 3 years cancer-free. Great to see you, Shayla.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you all, our audience, for being with us tonight, and thank you to our panelists. I know this is going to be a fantastic conversation. So you submitted questions, and let's start out by addressing them. So Dr. Bauer, Can you start off by telling us a bit about your research on the biological pathways that link stress with breast cancer outcomes? And what do we know about how stress and immunity are linked?
Great. Well, thanks so much, and delighted to be here with this great panel. So what do we know about stress? Stress is a very potent, has a potent influence on both our mental and physical health. So we know it's one of the strongest predictors of depression. It's also very closely linked with cardiovascular disease. And a lot of those effects are probably driven by stress effects on the immune system. So our immune system listens to our brain. When we're under stress, our brain releases little messengers throughout the body that talk to the immune system. They tell immune cells where to go and what to do when they get there. So how does that play out in the context of breast cancer? We know that stress is associated with breast cancer, particularly breast cancer progression, although I will say that association is not as strong as what we see for some of the other diseases that I mentioned. That said, we do see in animal studies, for example, that animals who are exposed to chronic stress, that changes their immune system in ways that seems to help facilitate the growth and the spread of breast tumors. So that's in animal models. In our work, we've tried to look at some of those associations in humans and patients. And there again, we see that certain kinds of chronic stress, especially things like social isolation, which is one of the most profound forms of chronic stress, the feeling that you don't have people that are connected to you, that you can count on for physical and emotional support. Those women have tumors that look more pro-metastatic, that look like they have the ability to progress. So that's on the stress side. So what about on the resilience side? We have tended to, in psychology, to focus a lot on stress and depression and anxiety. And same thing I think is true in the world of cancer and cancer survivorship. But we know that positive psychological processes are just as important and maybe even more important for both our mental and our physical health. So there's a lot of exciting new evidence showing that things like happiness, feelings of satisfaction in life, also feeling that you have a sense of meaning and purpose in life, that you are making a contribution to your community, your family, to society. Those things also seem to be having an effect both on our immune systems and on our overall health. So we're really excited about work we're doing with BCRF to figure out, so how do we promote these positive psychological states in ways that enhance well-being, but also may have effects on physical health?
Julian, you took such a complex topic and broke that down so succinctly for us. And so much of what you said, I think, is critical as a takeaway that, the absence of the bad stuff is not the same thing as the presence of the good stuff. And we need to study both and understand how not just the absence of stress, but the presence of pro-social characteristics, positive relationships, sense of meaning and purpose, all can contribute to possibly positive outcomes. And I'm excited to hear more about this work. So an example of this, I would love, Dr. Stanton, if you could tell us a bit more about your research on Project SOAR.
Sure. Project SOAR, which is partially funded by BCRF, and I'm so thankful for the funding, it stands for Speaking Our African American Realities. And you might see that I am not African American myself, but I have a fabulous community partner, Reverend Tammy Denise. And we have conducted now 2 studies, one with gatherings of women who were really speaking their truth about their experience of breast cancer, and the other, a questionnaire study that had about 120 women who participated. And what we found in women's experience was the incredible strength they had that helped them get through. And I'm not talking about the strength about sort of the Black superwoman kind kind of concept. I'm talking about inner strength, strength that comes from their community, and strength that comes from the kind of relationships they build. So, for example, we asked women, and this was in the questionnaire study, the what benefits have you found from going through breast cancer? And one of the surprising findings to me was in this sample of about 120 Black women, they had higher scores on finding benefits in the experience than any other sample of women with breast cancer that I've seen. So they really reported finding benefit in their experience to a pretty profound degree. And what we also learned is that what helped them find benefit often was the way they coped with their cancer experience. And what we found specifically was that women who coped through what I might call approach-oriented coping, that is coping through seeking social support, coping through expressing their emotions, coping through getting information, the knowledge is power that we heard about, coping through those kind of active ways of approaching their experience rather than trying to push it out of their heads, trying to push it out of their hearts. Women who coped in that approach-oriented way were those women who were most likely to find benefit in their experience. And so I think that tells us that there's something very important about the way you approach your breast cancer experience that can be helpful to you.
Dr. Stanton, that's so interesting. What you're describing, it sounds to me a little bit like post-traumatic growth. Like these women never would have asked, obviously, for breast cancer, but they found greater meaning, greater relationships through the experience.
Exactly. I am talking about what has been termed post-traumatic growth, and women's perceptions of post-traumatic growth. Also, what was interesting in this study is that women, the women in the study, all of whom were Black, didn't find it an easy thing to accept support initially. And that's one of the things they learned. So for example, I have a quote here. One of the women said, "When my friend told me I needed to let other people take care of me, I stood back and I said, can I do that? And so now when somebody wants to come in my kitchen and do my dishes, I say, go ahead." And they say, "Okay, you've done enough here. Do something else." I say, "Okay," but it took me years to learn to let somebody take care of me. And that's a lesson as Black women. We have to learn how to let other people take care of us. And so I think that it's not always easy to learn to let other people take care of you, to learn to not always be the strong one, but women can do it. And they often do it during their experience of breast cancer, that in ways that profoundly changes them.
That's so profound, and thinking that the experience, finding that balance between allowing someone to help us and bringing help in and getting our defenses down enough to say, come help me, while also not thinking about ourselves necessarily exclusively as patients or as weak or as someone who needs help, and striking that balance between our identity as a patient and our identity as a strong woman survivor.
So true. And actually that woman went on to say, I had to learn that I can let you take care of me and I can still be independent. So you can still be strong, and sometimes there's strength in letting other people take care of you because that's what they want to do.
It's a huge strength. So fabulous. So Shayla, I would love to hear from you and your experience having breast cancer at such a young age. That must have presented some very unique challenges to your mental health and your whole journey emerging in your life. So we'd just love to hear from you about what you've been grappling with.
Yes, I'll start off first though with saying, like expounding a little bit on what Dr. Stanton said. I have a quote on my refrigerator and I'm looking at it right now. And it really aligns with what you said is cancer did not make me a victim. I'm grateful for the transformed spirit that I have become. I was telling someone my story and they just stopped, they wrote that down and they gave it to me and it's on my refrigerator. And that it speaks exactly to what you said, because I had to learn how to accept help. And after accepting the help, then I had to learn to ask for help. And it's two completely separate things. The first was my mastectomy, and I'll never forget like my aunt coming to help me out, and I didn't really think I needed much. But then when she was there and I had the mastectomy and I couldn't really move my arm or do much, I realized how much I did need. So do you want me to cook you something? Yes, is the answer. And then as I went through chemotherapy, when it first started and people said, hey, do you need anything? Oh, no, just fine, just come. By session 2, I was like, do I need something? Green juice, water, sparkling water, electrolytes, laughter. And I found that I would have my chemotherapy rooms, there would sometimes be 9 and 10 people in there because I never told anyone no. I think the Shayla before cancer would have said, no, I'm okay, I'm fine. Like I have this on my own. I've been independent so much of my life. And cancer showed me that it was okay to accept the help and then also ask for it. So just to speak a little bit more about my diagnosis, like as you said, Dr. Feingold, is that I was diagnosed at 39. And to be very honest, I had no plans ever of fighting cancer in my last year, the 30s. I had plans for fun, hanging out with friends and doing all the things before entering the big 4-0. So that went a little haywire. And the biggest challenges though, were having to accept how much control I lost. Immediately one minute you're living your life and the next minute your calendar is filled with doctor appointments. And the other thing is like within a month, I probably had more needles in my veins than I had in my entire 39 years of life. And at the same time, trying to process everything that I was about to lose. We had already on the table that I was going to lose my left breast, possibly the right, but it only stayed with the left. And then coming up in the future, I knew it was going to have to be, I was going to lose my hair because of chemo. So the stressors were a lot, but the stressors are also me talking about this 3.5 years later. I think in it, I didn't really know how much I was being stressed. I just knew that I didn't have control and that I was trying to find ways to keep control. And that's kind of where I resided. Now looking back, it was like, oh, wow, I was like scrambling, like what can I do? Do I need to hang with my friends? I still want to go to the gym. Like what can I fit in before surgeries? What can I fit in before chemo? And that was really me reacting to the stress that was put onto me basically kind of overnight. It felt like everything just happened all at once.
Your life was profoundly changed. The
Yes.
expectation of what it was going to look like was just totally derailed. And wow, so how much time was your treatment? How much of your life did this take up? I know you're now 3 years cancer free. What was the journey like?
So I was diagnosed December 17th, 2017. And I finished all of my treatment October 9th, 2018. And I tell this joke I made to the first person, what do they call it? The radiologist, the one who looks at all your scans. And after I had my mammogram and my sonogram, because I felt the lump myself, I got bit by a mosquito, really high up my chest up here. And I felt the bump, and that was about September. So it took a little while for me to go to the doctor, start getting things checked out. But when I went for the mammogram, that's when things became real. And I'll never forget, she brought me into her office and she showed me her scans, and she's just like, this is what I'm looking at. Do you see this? And I looked at her, and with all my little might, I just said, but this isn't what I asked Santa for Christmas. And she did not laugh, and I'm waiting for the laugh. And that's when I knew how real things were and how much like my life changed just like that, just from like making this one little joke that she just sighed and said, oh, Shayla. And I was like, oh, things are about to be real and change quickly. And you don't have time, I think, to think in that moment, was there was all of that positivity that I kind of live my life with, and I live with this sense of joy and happiness, out the door. And it's funny because they're not funny, but it kind of does like really kind of align with March 2020. a lot of people felt that same feeling without having to go through something dramatic or go through cancer. But like one day our lives was the same, and the next day our lives were completely 100% different. So a lot of this actually aligns with how to go through all the trauma from cancer to the pandemic and the effects it had on us.
That sudden lack of control. When the pandemic hit, were you like, I got this, I've done cancer? Like
I was like, oh, I have this. What? Stay home? Yeah, no control. Been here, done that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that what you're describing, it really is post-traumatic growth. It's the problems, the challenges we face that we would never ask for. On the other side, when we come out of them, we're stronger than we ever could have imagined. And I think that's a huge testament, likely to your attitude going into it, your support system, those, 9-10 people in that chemo room with you. And we'll definitely hear more about your experience finding well-being throughout this. I thank you for sharing, Shayla. And I want to turn it back to Dr. Bauer and Dr. Stanton to ask you about what evidence-based treatments do we have to help patients like Shayla throughout the process of, suddenly being a patient, being a cancer patient, and then being a survivor. How do we support patients and their families, and what does the research say?
You want me to start? Okay. Yeah, so such an important question. And I would say, psychologists have been trying to help cancer patients manage distress for many years. And there's really good evidence-based treatments for that. Things like cognitive behavioral stress management, which is designed to help kind of shift how you're appraising your cancer experience, teach you relaxation techniques. Dr. Stanton and I actually have collaborated on some initial work that was specifically designed to help younger women. And we know younger women are more depressed, more distressed, they're more anxious. Their life is disrupted in a really different way when you're 39, right, than when you're 59 or 69. All of your expectations, as you say, your life changes overnight. So when we were targeting younger women, we actually got interested in mindfulness meditation as potentially a really good fit for this particular group. And it was really informed by stories like what Shayla was talking about of the women that we were working with, that we were talking to, they were exercising fine, they were taking care of themselves in other ways, but the stress and anxiety and fear that cancer had brought into their life was feeling really overwhelming. So we've been then pursuing this program of work on mindfulness. And I'll tell you, one of the things I really like about that as an intervention is that it seems to be good for both dialing down stress and depression and anxiety, but it improves a lot of other things too. So it seems to help with fatigue and sleep problems, which we know are both so prevalent in breast cancer survivors, especially young women. And it also, this is what I get most excited about, it seems to tune up well-being. So people who go through our mindfulness interventions, they report higher levels of happiness, higher levels of kind of feelings of peace and meaning and purpose in life. And they also show improvements in their immune system. So we've been, again, I would say there's a kind of menu of different evidence-based treatments. The one we've been particularly interested in for younger women is mindfulness.
And before we hear from Dr. Stanton, could you just tell our audience a little bit about what that means, what a mindfulness intervention would look like?
Sure, yeah. So as you know, we're also probably familiar with this idea of mindfulness. It's defined as paying attention to present moment experience with openness and curiosity without judgment. So we do a 6-week intervention that's basically designed to help people cultivate that kind of mindful awareness. But I think a lot of people, when they think about mindfulness, they think, okay, I'm gonna every picture, if I'm trying to pull up clip art for a presentation on mindfulness, every single one, it's like you're sitting in this Buddha-like posture. And that's not what we're doing. There are meditation practices, but basically they involve sitting for a few minutes and just trying to learn to pay attention to your breath, learn to pay attention to your body. Learn to pay attention to the sounds around you. But ultimately, I think for our women, what's most helpful, for me when I've done the intervention, what's most helpful is you're bringing that quality of attention to physical pain, to your emotions, to difficult thoughts. And it's an awareness of those things, but there's accompanied just hand in hand with that awareness is this without judgment piece. So like, oh, I'm feeling really anxious and scared, and that's okay. And I can be aware of those feelings, and then I can kind of watch them go away. And I think that quality of, we all just are our worst critics all the time, right? And I'm listening to your incredible story, Sheila. I'm thinking about the pandemic. And the whole time during the pandemic, I was like, I am not a pandemic thriver. Like, I am not making the best sourdough bread I've ever made. And I really was stressing myself out that I wasn't experiencing all these incredible life changes. So, and I'm laughing at myself, right? Because I'm like, oh, here I go. I need to go do a self-kindness meditation. Like, my experience is okay. The way I'm managing this is okay. So I think for me, that's been an important piece of mindfulness. And in our empirical work, it looks like that's critical for these effects on other aspects of well-being. That when mindfulness turns up your kindness towards yourself, you're less depressed, and it may even impact your immune system.
Thanks, Dr. Bauer. And I love just how honest you are. Even as an expert teaching these things, it still can be a challenge to always cultivate that self-compassion or to automatically do it. What I'm hearing is the automatic thought came to your head of, I didn't thrive in the pandemic, or, my sourdough bread was inferior to my neighbors. And then to bring that curiosity and to say, isn't that interesting? And look at, and then that's where the self-compassion kicks in. And I think mindfulness, the way you described it, and I've heard it be described by my colleague, Corey Muscara, as mindfulness is like being with our experience instead of always in our experience, and treating ourselves like we would, treat a friend, and be an observer in our own lives. So I love that you've seen that this is efficacious for women and helping them enhance the quality of their attention and their well-being. That's pretty awesome. Dr. Stanton, anything to add on this question related to well-being interventions?
Only just, and I completely agree with Dr. Bauer. I mean, the mindfulness work that she's gone on to do is very powerful in terms of its effects, and more cognitive behavioral stress management approaches seem to be quite useful, both in terms of sort of palliating or lessening some of the negative effects, the distress, et cetera, and in terms of promoting well-being. The only thing I'd add is we also have done some trials, and one particularly was partially supported by BCRF, in which women wrote about their experience and wrote expressively about their experience, the good and the bad. They could write whatever they wanted as long as they wrote about their deepest thoughts and feelings. And in one of the studies, we also asked women to write about the benefits of the experience. But in general, the women who wrote expressively, either literally on paper and with paper and pen, or we had one trial, we called it Project Connect Online, and we did a 3-hour workshop where women built their own websites. And the centerpiece of the website was a blog to write about their experience. So it ended up sort of being journaling online, and they could share it with whomever they wanted to. It was their choice. And what we found there, and especially for women in current treatment for breast cancer, was that women who were in this expressive writing condition compared to women who were on a waiting list control, they were more likely to have to benefit in terms of both depressive symptoms, but also in terms of an increased sense of life appreciation and increased positive mood. And we found that, so how did that happen? Well, we found particular characteristics of the writing that seemed to make a difference. One was actually expression of more negative emotions predicted a reduction in depressive symptoms. So it was that kind of open expression of negative emotions that predicted reduction in depressive symptoms. Expression of positive emotion in the writing predicted an increase in positive mood. So expressing both, negative and positive aspects of the experience seem to be important, as well as a reduction in loneliness seemed to be important in predicting outcomes. So Julie talked about the social isolation and how powerful that can be. Being able to, and this was in Project Connect Online, being able to put your emotions out there and to share it with others in your social network seem to be quite powerful, and especially in reductions in loneliness and increases in social support from friends. So I just say expression also can be useful in particular contexts.
That's phenomenal to hear, especially since none of these interventions are expensive or particularly expensive, or like really, they're low-hanging fruit. Writing about our feelings, learning to attend to our present experience, calling on friends, expressing how we feel. These are all things all of us could be doing, and they don't seem that far away from like a feasible goal that each of us could achieve. So I think that's fantastic.
Well, and Dr. Bauer is putting the mindfulness intervention online as well. And so that's really important, making it accessible for as many women as possible.
Yeah, this is actually our BCRF funded work is trying to take this more intensive in terms of having to get somewhere and show up at a particular place and do a live group. We're testing out different versions of the mindfulness intervention. Does it work if you deliver it over Zoom? It seems like it does. Does it work if you deliver it on an app? We'll see. That's our next study.
That's fabulous. So hearing about all of these interventions, I now want to turn it to the patient, to Shayla. What was helpful for you as you were going through this journey? How did you find your way toward where you are today and manage to have some well-being sprinkled throughout there when it seemed like everything else was totally out of control?
Well, for me, first I want to say something about the mindfulness. Um, Dr. Bauer, you said something about connecting with our feelings. I actually, so many of the things I know to do now, I had no clue about then, no clue. I had never been to therapy. I wasn't on a spiritual awakening journey. I was just in it. But now it brought me to think of this thing that my therapist said very soon on when I first started seeing her. And that she still says to this day. She's like, a full life is one where we live with all of our feelings, like all of them. That's the sad, the angry, the frustrated, the downtrodden. Like, we are allowed to have those feelings, and you don't have to just sit in positivity, but you have those feelings, you connect with those feelings. That's the mindfulness. I give that feeling a why. Why do I feel frustrated? So now you're naming the why, and then you process it. And then you're able to then give yourself some positivity to replace that feeling. But yeah, I really connected with what you said there. And I remember when I first started going to therapy, my therapist was saying all this. I was like, yeah, I don't agree. I don't know what you're really talking about. I don't understand. What I feel is that I just went through cancer and that I need to process. But I didn't even have the name and the words to put to what I was feeling to process. So I had actually never been to therapy before. I not saying that I didn't need it. I'm saying I had never been. So I'd never been to therapy before. But what led me there was that after I finished all my treatment in October 2018, when people would say, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Don't you feel great? There was a part of me that was like, yes, I feel great. I am getting hair back. My eyebrows are growing back. Can you see them? Like all of those things. But there was this other part of me that said, something is happening inside of me that I can't put words to, that I can't name. And those things were like swirling inside. And that's what led me to therapy, because I knew that if I did not go, that down the line, I would have been angry at cancer. And it's really easy to get angry at something that took so much away. I could never fault someone for getting angry for what it does to us. But I just knew that personally, I didn't want to sit in a place of anger and I didn't want to get there. So that's what led me to therapy. And you also spoke about Dr. Bauer, like writing a letter, or Dr. Stanton writing a letter. Within my third or fourth therapy session, my therapist had me write a letter to cancer. She actually said like, hey, what's one of your favorite songs to like relax to? And I told her, she's like, okay, go put that on. I was like, oh, what is happening? But I went and put this song on and she gave me a pen and paper and she said, now I want you to write a letter to cancer. And it was the first time that I think I really sat down and thought like, well, cancer led me to this room, a place I never thought I'd be, and a place that I know that I want to be. Because the second I left my very first therapy session after, which was my 1-year anniversary, as I was going to therapy, and that day that started of like a memory from 1 year of cancer, from 1 year of my mastectomy, that memory of all happening and sitting and processing all day of like what happened 1 year ago, I went from like full energy to exhausted. So by the time the therapy session came, mine was in the evening, I almost ran to this woman's office. After being there and like knowing that, wow, I needed that. By the time it came a couple of sessions later to writing the letter and like really putting pen to paper on, this is what I feel, this is what I lost, these are the things that have come up. I had never thought those things before. This woman said, hey, why don't you write it? And it was so helpful. And it helped me pick up a journaling practice. I had never journaled before. There's so many things I had never done that now I'm like, I journal, like mindfulness, I name my emotions. But it's all been so helpful to get me to where I am today. And a new practice that I picked up that I think people may like, and I got this from someone that I work with, is thanking my body in the morning. And I wish I would have thought of this or known this during cancer, but it was like every morning when I wake up, I just say to myself, like, thank you, body, for the magical work that you do. Last week I had a cold. I said, thank you for fighting this cold. Thank you for the sleep that we had tonight. And then I ask myself, what is my purpose? What is my part to play today? So like putting it out into the universe, like what is my part in today? And then just letting it go from there. But I had never thought to thank my body for as much as it does. Like going to sleep and waking up, pretty cool, guys. Pretty freaking cool. Recovering from a cold, like these little things. And I think if I would have, people who ask me today how they can go through their cancer journey, I'm happy that I have the tools to now share. Like, thank your body. Hey, thank you, body, for making it through chemo. Today was hard. Today sucked. But thank you for making it through. Now I'm going to sleep. And that I feel has put such a different spin on my days, like starting with this thanking my body.
Thank you for sharing that practice with us, and everyone on the call, stay tuned because maybe we'll do that a little bit at the end of our session today. And Shayla, so much of what you're talking about, like you're making this all sound so sexy and so cool. And yet I think we're coming to a place now where mental health and caring for ourselves is becoming more that way. And I'm just curious to hear from our doctors on the call, like, how have we gotten to this place of destigmatizing mental health care and moving toward a place where we can talk about these things openly and be proud of the way we're caring for ourselves? Like, I am so proud of Shayla's experience right now of coming to therapy. And yet it also took you a year to get into that room after going through this traumatic experience. So I'm just curious to hear about how far we've come and where our culture is going in terms of destigmatizing mental health. Perhaps Dr. Stanton can kick us off.
Sure. When I think about this question, I think about how far we've come in destigmatizing cancer. Because when I first started in cancer, in my interest in cancer, then even physicians, but also other people often didn't say the word. They said CA, like physicians said CA instead. And for people to basically be able to say, I have cancer, you know, it just wasn't done so much. And partly I'm dating myself, but that's okay. But now we can talk about cancer and we can talk about, you know, having it. I think we've seen a similar thing in terms of psychological health and the stigma that's that's going on around that, at least maybe in the United States, but not in some other countries. And I think that, so we have seen quite a lot of destigmatization, and part of it, and there's good evidence for this, part of it is when public figures come out and say, you know, I've had depression, or I've been, you know, I had a panic attack on the court. Kevin Love, Cavaliers basketball player, said, I had a panic attack on the court. We see Naomi Osaka, you know, talk about their experience. Then I think we see a public shift in the acceptance of, okay, these famous rich people, you know, have these things. Maybe, you know, maybe it's more okay that I do too. Now I think the real challenge is having enough psychological services for people. And so, you know, Shayla was, you know, being able to go to a therapist was really obviously important. The pandemic, there is a wave of mental health issues that are happening. And so being able, as someone with cancer, to find somebody who can help. So I think we need, I think we might be a little bit past the stigma now. Now we really need more services and evidence-based services.
Dr. Bauer, anything to add from your experience, and Shayla, does that track with your experience? I'd love to hear from both of you on this question of how we've gotten to where we are.
The only thing I would add is I do think the stigma is reduced, but is still there, I think, to some extent. I also think we find it very hard to make time for ourselves in the way that, for example, Shayla's been talking about. You know, and I know, especially when we have families, everyone else comes first. And that's something that we've been really trying to talk about in our work with younger women, is like, how do you make time for yourself? You're able to make time for exercise because you feel like that's so important for your physical well-being. But guess what? Taking care of your psychological well-being is just as important. So how do you prioritize that in your long list of to-do items for the day? And I feel like that's another place. It's not really about stigma, but it's more about, how do I kind of convince myself I'm worth it? I need to spend the time on this. I'm allowed to take this time for myself, to go to therapy, to do the journaling. And I think that's another place where we can do better.
Mm-hmm.
As a cancer survivor, I actually have to say the stigma is highly still there. I, in fact, know women who didn't tell anybody. They didn't know how to tell anybody. They didn't want to tell anybody. They didn't want anyone to know. So they did the exact opposite. They just went into a hole, because how do you hide your bald head? So the only way to hide is just to not talk to anybody. So I know people who did the exact same thing. I feel like I'm able to be so open with it because I also live in New York City. Like that is, I mean, in New York, it's like, you don't have a therapist? What? So I have this ability to be so open with it. That is also my personality, is to share. I know for myself that I could not have gone through it alone. So I initially told first my family, but the next was like very slowly in the month of December, started telling friends. They called to say Merry Christmas. I'm like, I'll also have something else to tell you. And so I started doing that. I didn't tell the masses via social media until the day before my surgery. And I put something funny up on social media. I think it was like a dancing meme outside of Memorial Sloan Kettering. And that's how I told people. But I knew for me that I had to, that I could not have gone through it alone. But for myself, I know people who did the exact opposite, and I know them. And so I think there's a difference there. And I can say, I think even culturally, it comes down to that culturally, everyone doesn't feel comfortable going to a therapist. And then culturally speaking, there are less brown therapists, and there are less male therapists for men who've gone through various types of cancers. So the stigma feels like, I think, and we're in this world, we're in our world, the stigmas, it's so less, but in reality, it's like, how do you actually make it what it feels like when you're not in the breast cancer world? And that I'm not sure, but I definitely, I feel like part of my little mission in life is that if someone has gone through it, or someone's going through it, or someone's friends are going through it, that they can say, hey, go talk. I have a friend who's gone through it and she came out okay down the line. Like, maybe you can talk to her, and then maybe like people within the breast cancer community, we start to be the resource for each other in order to like help the stigmas go down. But it's hard. I mean, like you said, Jordan, I waited an entire year from diagnosis to therapy, including like not going to any groups or anything like that.
It is hard. And like Dr. Bauer and Dr. Stanton have said, like, once, getting over the stigma that's there, then just finding the help, finding resources can be really challenging. So it's very reassuring to hear that some of these programs are being piloted and tested for their efficacy through apps and online. And, the more we can get these treatments to people, I think the better. And so I wanted to ask, what are these mind-body therapies we're talking about? We mentioned a little bit about mindfulness. We heard about what some of those practices are. What are the mind-body practices that, aren't just therapy focusing on the neck up, and are not just cancer focusing on, the body, but how do we integrate these?
So, mindfulness is a key one. Other ones that we and our colleagues have been investigating are things like yoga. We've done yoga studies, we've done studies of Tai Chi. And so we really try to figure out for a particular problem what we think is going to be a good target. So our yoga study was done with patients who were having pretty severe post-treatment fatigue. And they got much better. Yoga, I think in that particular kind of yoga was a very physical but restorative, relaxing practice. It was a really good fit for that symptom. Tai Chi we've used for breast cancer survivors with insomnia. Shayla, you mentioned sleep, and you should say thank you for sleep, because sleep is this incredible rejuvenator of our minds and bodies. It's so important to be getting a good night's sleep, and there are effective interventions for sleep, including cognitive behavioral therapy, but also Tai Chi. That's really beneficial effects with Tai Chi. So those are just a few that we've studied. There's also things like acupuncture, et cetera. But I think, to me, acupuncture is a little more kind of physical, whereas these others really do incorporate a component of both.
I think the only thing that I'd add there is that I increasingly see, and I know it's not intentionally designed for this, but I do see cardiovascular physical activity as a mind-body therapy, because we know that, and neither Julie nor I do this research, but we have colleagues who do with people with cancer. And we do know that physical activity, and particularly the things that get your heart pumping, but also strength training. You can see me do my strength training. But particularly kind of cardiovascular, that also helps with things like depressive symptoms. And that kind of feeling of strength that you get helps with your sense of self-efficacy and sense of restoring your sense of health. So I think that we need to put a word in for physical activity, because it seems to be so important.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to stand up now. So last question for the group. So what have you all learned about the power of positivity in psychology and healing? And Dr. Stanton, I'll turn this to you.
I think one thing we've not said is that positivity cannot be a prescription, because if we say, there's this book called You Can't Afford the Luxury of a Negative Thought. And I think that that's a terrible prescription. That what we've seen here today is that experiencing, and what Shayla said, experiencing the full range of emotions. This is not a Pollyanna prescription. It's experiencing the full range of emotions is important. and not just, oh, the world is so bright. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about practices that can increase well-being.
So huge. Shayla, what's your takeaway about positivity in psychology and healing?
Oh, so much, but we only have a couple of minutes. So I would say, life throws us lemons, and everyone says, hey, when life throws you lemons, make lemonade, but that's actually misses a couple of steps. When you have a lemon, there takes multiple other things to get to lemonade. That's the positivity. So you need to have the water, you need to have the sugar, you need to have the spoon, you need to have the ice, you need to have the pitcher. So when life throws you these lemons, get your ingredients. What is it that you can do to make your lemon into lemonade? And then those are the positive things. Those are the things that you need to incorporate in order to get you there. But it definitely doesn't happen overnight or like happen all at once. So I like that I've changed that saying and I use it all the time. Like, yeah, when life throws you lemons, get the things you need to make it into lemonade. It's going to take a little kit.
Beautiful. Yeah, and people.
People.
That's fabulous. Yeah, thank you, Shayla. And finally, Dr. Bauer.
Well, I was going to say something else, but maybe I'll riff on Shayla's a little bit, which I think is one of the things we know from studying well-being is there's a lot of ways to get there, right? And you get to, you've got to figure out what is your preferred approach. So one of my friends and colleagues has developed this positive affect intervention, and every week you learn a new skill that she's pulled from the positive psychology literature. So one week you do positive reappraisal, right? It's like, okay, this terrible thing happened to me. Is there any silver lining? Is there any way of thinking about this? And some people, that's the one for them. They just love positive reappraisal. The next week you learn mindfulness. The next week you do gratitude writing. The next week you, this is a great week, you are assigned to go out and do fun things. Like what are 3 things you've never done in your city? Go have fun. There's, connecting with friends. So I think that's in this thing of what do you need to make your lemonade? And there's different pathways of getting there. So again, it goes along with this. There's no prescription for this, but there are tools. And for people to be figuring out what tools are the best fit for them, I think is a really good approach.
Absolutely. Our positive interventions have to speak to us and they're proper to the person, they're proper to who we are. And I think those are all such important takeaways. And I just want to give you a huge thank you to our panelists for such a thoughtful and informative discussion. And I know these conversations can be really challenging, especially for, Shayla, who's been through this. This is so personal to you. And thank you for bringing your authenticity and your honesty and just your whole self to this space and to our audience. And it's so important for us to continue learning and growing. And so thank you. We can all give you a round of applause from home.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Great moderation.
Oh, good.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
I wish we could just talking.
I know. Well, we'll have to come back, TPA Planning Committee. So I want to invite our audience and our panelists, feel free to keep your videos on or off, just to spend a minute at home thinking about one thing that we talked about today, grounding yourself in your body, feeling your body encounter your chair or the couch or your feet on the floor, wherever you may be. Wherever you're coming from in this moment, you can let your eyes rest down or close completely. And inspired by Shayla's question, how can we thank our body today? Can we thank our heart for beating day in and day out for us, circulating our blood through our body? Thank our lungs for delivering us oxygen from the very tip of our brains to the tip of our toes, allowing us to think and attend and connect with our loved ones. Thank our feet for keeping us upright, our brains for signaling us to breathe 22,000 times a day without us ever having to think about it. Send that gratitude and love through our bodies, and even make space to think of what we're not happy with our bodies when they malfunction, when we feel ill. because positive psychology is not just about uplifting all the good stuff, but about holding space for some of the stuff that is not ideal, that we don't always love, and recognizing that all of those things can be true at the same time. Take a couple deep breaths and just think about, what is my part to play today? And how can I move forward throughout the rest of my evening, the rest of my week, playing that part, prioritizing relationships, meaning, vitality, to be a version of ourselves that we are truly proud of. And I invite you to slowly open your eyes, bring your awareness back into the room, and join me as I thank everyone for joining us tonight for the TPA Talks on the Agenda, the Power of Positive Psychology. We deeply hope that you will return for the next installment of the series, Understanding the Risks of Breast Cancer, on Thursday, November 10th. And you can refer to your digital program booklet or the Pink Agenda website for more information about the upcoming events and initiatives. At any time, you can text TPA Talks to the number 44321, again, 44321, to support the Pink Agenda and the life-changing breast cancer research that it funds. And thank you, as always, keeping the Pink Agenda and breast cancer research on your agenda. Good night, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.